Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on the globe. Thank you for joining us on this webcast. My name is Rui Vizcaya. I represent a company called Watchful Software, and the purpose of us being here today is for us to talk a little bit about behavioral biometrics. The idea is for us to talk a little bit about a specific case of behavioral biometrics techniques or approaches called keystroke dynamics, and how those are, or that is, really a silent revolution in digital fingerprinting. We have a couple of slides prepared for you today. You will have access to the slides later on, so don't worry. There's no need to print screen or take a lot of notes on the webinar. You will have the recording available to you, and I'll give you some more of the house rules in just 2 seconds as soon as we have more people joining this webcast. We have a lot of folks interested in watching this webcast, so starting from the beginning, the idea is for us to talk for 30 minutes, no more than that, on the behavioral biometrics and how is that specific technique of behavioral biometrics called keystroke dynamics a silent revolution in the digital fingerprinting. I'm your host for this morning, evening, or night, depending on where you are. As I said, I'm Director of Product Management and Strategic Accounts for Watchful Software. And basically, some of the house rules for this webinar means that you're centrally muted, so there's no point or no need for you to mute, unmute yourself. We do this so that everyone hears loud and clear what is being said. And then at the end, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. We will spare a couple of minutes for the Q&A session, and basically you will have the opportunity to ask a couple of questions, and to the best of my abilities, I'll be able to answer those. We will record, and we are recording this webinar, and basically the slide deck and the recording of the webinar will be made available on watchfulsoftware.com. So if not today, tomorrow you will have that, and you will be able to watch it or have access to it on demand. But starting from the beginning and starting from the objective, or why are we here today? We're talking about, if nothing else, digital identities and how secure our digital identities are. The industry thus far has been saying that multi-factor authentication is the way to make that digital identity more connected, more aligned with your physical identity. So basically, they ask users for passwords, to know passwords, to memorize ever-increasing and complex passwords, with bigger passwords, with more numbers and more digits and so on. And basically, you may end up in a scenario in which you have to memorize all sorts of passwords. And let's face it, it's not really a good security mechanism to have those passwords, because those can be lost, those can be stolen easily, or someone can easily get access to those passwords just by trying to impersonate you and trying to understand what your password would be. So the industry is telling you that you should also have tokens. You should also have something, not just something that you know, which is in the case of a password, but something that you have. And a token could be, an SMS code that is sent to you, or some matrix card that is given to you, and then you need that password to log in, but then you also need some sort of a token in order to do the transaction on online banking, or to log in, if nothing else. But basically what you're saying is that a password is something that you know, a token is something that you have, and even if you have a combination of these things, sometimes you're not secure, because as time goes by after you log in, the strength of that authentication mechanism decreases over time, for one simple reason. You're not asked to authenticate and re-authenticate and re-authenticate over and over again. You are asked to do that one time, and that's it. Which means that as time goes by after that authentication moment happens, the strength of that authentication decreases. Even if you don't have any password stolen or lost, or if you have all your tokens, and even if you're asked to put a fingerprint or something else from a physical biometry point of view, which means means something that you are, into the equation, or a combination of these three factors. As time goes by, after you authenticate and you logged in into the system, the strength of that authentication decreases. For, as I've said, one simple reason: you're not asked to re-authenticate again just by the fact that, you know, X amount of seconds or X amount of minutes have gone by. So what we're saying from a behavioral biometrics point of view is that you need to have the strength of that authentication increase and not decrease as time goes by. In order to do that, you need to, first of all, allow or demand that the user re-authenticates, if you will, every single moment in time that he or she's logged in into that computer system session. Now, in order to do that, will you ask the user to re-input another password, or to re-add another token, or to, you know, put another fingerprint scan into the equation? You know, that's not feasible. That's not something that you can do. So what you do and what you ask, or what you demand the user, what you should, better said, demand the user to have, is behavioral biometrics, a way for you to know and understand who the user is just by the way he or she interacts and behaves versus that computer system. So behavioral biometrics, and we are talking about a particular aspect or a particular subset of a much broader set of behavioral biometrics, and this one is keystroke dynamics. And basically, keystroke dynamics means how you type on a physical keyboard, computer keyboard. You know, the way that you type onto that keyboard has a way that assesses who you are by the way that you behave. So it's a behavioral way of assessing who you are. Behavioral biometrics, by means of keystroke dynamics, is a way to monitor for identity theft attempts and analyzing typing patterns of users. So basically, it's not really the way that you input your password, or the way that you have your token, or the way that you authenticate yourself via biometrics. That's all IT and security good practice, but it's something that sits on top of that. While you are logged in, while you are already inside the security perimeter, how does the computer system assesses that the person, the human person that is typing on that regular and physical keyboard, it's still the person that is entitled to have that password, that token, or the person that actually authenticated himself or herself using that physical biometric, just by means of the way that you type. It's also a way for you to do this on a constant basis. So every time, every single second that the user is operating and interacting with the system, it's analyzing and in the background who the user is, so that it understands if it should allow the user to continue interacting with the system or not. So it's an ongoing basis. It's not a one-time type of authentication. It's what, you know, analysts around the world are commonly knowing or starting to understand as identification. How do you identify that user throughout the time that the user is interacting with that system? It's also something that require no hardware. It's really a software-only solution. The only hardware that you require for that keystroke dynamics type of behavioral biometrics system is a physical keyboard, which you already have when you're interacting with that system, with that laptop, desktop, or workstation in that sense. And it really needs no less than a tweet. So it really needs less words or less keystrokes than a tweet in order to assess and understand who you are. And it's doing that on a constantly basis. So it means it will assess who you are one time, and then again, and then again, and then again, while you're interacting with that computer system. It's also a complement to any intrusion detection system or two-factor authentication, because it adds that behavioral biometric layer. It's again not saying that behavioral biometrics by means of keystroke dynamics is the one thing that will replace and prevent you from having your identity stolen, but it's something that on top of that intrusion detection systems that you have and two-factor or multi-factor authentication that you have will help in that risk assessment capability. It's another layer, it's another variable that will weigh into the analysis, the risk analysis, that will then ultimately ask that user to re-authenticate himself or herself again, or just prevent that user from continue to have access to that system. Because we're talking about keystroke dynamics, we're actually talking about it works with any language. I mean, it really doesn't, it's really agnostic to if you're typing in English or in French or in German or in Chinese or even in any other language in the world. It's really agnostic to that. It works with any app, so basically it doesn't require that you log into a specific app or you use a designated or a specific workflow or a specific silo environment in order for this to happen. It really works in any app, in any environment that you're operating. So if you're sending an email or if you're typing in your IRS, or if you're doing something like that, it's always there, always assessing who you are, and it works with any content. And this is really interesting. So it's not really about the way that you type that password. It's really after you type that password, what happens then? Is it still me? Is it still the user that is typing that email? Is it still the user that is drafting that proposal that on Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF? Is it still the user that is posting that thing into Twitter, into Facebook, into LinkedIn or whatever the social media network out there? Is it still the user interacting with the system in any way, shape, or form in terms of language, in terms of app, and in terms of whatever the content that user is inputting into the system? It's also transparent to the user by means that it runs in the background. I mean, it doesn't require you to click on any buttons or go into a complex workflows, and it never asks you for any dedicated text input. So it never asks you to say, type this thing here, and while you do that, and after you do that, I will tell you if you are you or not, if you are really the rightful owner of that password token, biometry, or whatever. It's really not doing that. It's really allowing you to be free and to do whatever you do, which is your job, your daily routines, whatever the workflows those are, and allowing you to be safe and secure that if someone else is trying to impersonate you, it will stop that person from continuing to have access to that system. It also allows to deliver mitigation actions in terms of understanding, if it detects that the user is not the rightful owner of that password token or anything like that, it will take a screenshot of the system or take a photo of the person that is in front of that computer system, or even send an email or ask for a test authentication screen, etc., etc., etc. So there are, by means of, in itself, the keystroke dynamics capability, ways for you to deliver or trigger mitigation actions to prevent that breach from continuing to occur. But it's also a way to be feeding other systems for risk assessment analysis and trying to understand if the user that is interacting with that system is still the rightful owner of that password. So there's a couple of use cases that I would like to discuss at this case. These are just example use cases of where this technology applies. The very first one is someone else logged into my computer? Is someone else, I went to have a cup of coffee, I forgot to log off my computer, is someone just came alongside me and start typing in my computer, but it's not me, but it's impersonating me, and doing harm or just playing with me? Can the computer, can the system, can the keystroke dynamics behavioral biometrics technology assess and understand that even if the user is, already logged in, the person that is actually typing on that computer is not actually the person that should be typing on that computer? Or if someone is trying to impersonate me on social media, for example, this is just an example, and understanding that if someone tries to post on my behalf, or someone tries to tweet on my behalf, or if someone tries to assess something that should not have access to because it's not me, basically, can the keystroke dynamics technology prevent that? Yes, it can. And also, think of it like, what happens when you're doing an online exam? What happens when you're a university or you're an online examining entity that provides that ability? How can you rest assured that the person on the other side of the line is actually the person that he or she said it was when doing the exam? So if I'm allowing people to take courses online, how can I rest assured that the person that is actually taking the exam and taking the course is actually the person that paid for it, is actually the person that should be taking it, and not someone else that is better at doing math, science, or even English or something like that. The easiest example when you're talking about behavioral biometrics is online banking. I'm trying to give you some other perspectives on how keystroke dynamics can go way and beyond that online banking. Again, in itself, keystroke dynamics can really give you some mitigation actions, but the way you should or could think about keystroke dynamics is really a way to be another factor that will weigh into the decision-making process for the risk assessment analysis of your factor. So, for example, if someone is a user with the rightful credentials, trying to access something with the right IP address, and trying to access something in terms of the right geography, etc., but it's not really matching to the keystroke dynamics typing pattern that it has stored for that user, maybe you should try and understand if that is a risk factor that you have in there and deploy some mitigation actions on it. Okay. There's really no active enrollment required for keystroke dynamics. So when we say that passive enrollment is the key, it means that it's not asking the user to do anything. The moment it is running on that laptop or desktop or workstation, whatnot, it's also immediately assessing and creating a profile of you as a user. And that profile is dynamic. Dynamic in the sense that it will be updated as you go along. So for example, if you break a finger, or if you go and have lunch and you take one drink too many, and then the next time in that afternoon you will be typing in a different way, it's actually understanding that you have several ways of typing. It's actually understanding that you as an individual, you have different ways that you can type on a physical keyboard, and that profile is actually incorporating that several differences that you have in the way that you type and updating those as time goes by. So it's really dynamic, that profiling, and it's constantly making decisions and calculating the scores, and this is where the algorithm weighs in. It's where the decision-making process weighs in terms of the false positives, false negatives, and how deep and capable you want the technology to be in terms of really understanding if you're really the user, the rightful owner of that password to be logging in and to be continuously operating with that system, or you want it to work a little bit more loose. So enrollment from a passive perspective, decision making, but also dynamic profiling in the sense that it will continuously upgrading your profile. When we're talking about behavioral biometrics and when we're talking about keystroke dynamics, one of the solutions out there is TypeWatch. TypeWatch is a product suite that has several flavors and is developed by Watchful Software. You have the enterprise version, you have the for individuals version, and you have the web version. And there are differences into these three concepts that I'll try to explain in the few minutes to come. First and foremost, you have the enterprise version. It's, as the name or as the brand is said, tailored towards an enterprise that needs to have a way to manage it centrally, to enforce policies, to define security roles and levels, to define monitoring alarms, and to have user-based mitigation actions. So basically you have someone that will be a sysadmin that will develop different roles or will establish different roles. It will establish different threat thresholds or different thresholds for the technology per those roles, and it will deploy different mitigation actions onto the different users depending on the role that those users are. A typical example would be someone that operates or deals with highly sensitive information may want to have more strict policy applied, vis-a-vis someone that doesn't have that strict of a policy or doesn't really need that policy to be so strict because it doesn't really handle highly sensitive information, for example. So the way you can do this is by, from a managerial standpoint, you can slide the bar down, to the left or to the right, to a moderate level of threat analysis, a high level or highest level of threat analysis. And when we're talking about a highest, we're talking about an accuracy of above 98%. There's no 100% accuracy in these cases because we're actually talking about behavioral biometrics. There's no 100% accuracy. What you can get is up to the lowest delta possible between the accuracy and the 100%. And when you get into the highest in terms of TypeWatch, you're getting into below 2% fault acceptance in terms of the accuracy of the algorithm. And then there's all sorts of policies that you can have in terms of the of the alarms that you have for those roles. You have the yellow alarm, the orange alarm, the red alarm, and then you can trigger different mitigation actions for those alarms. Take a picture, take a screenshot, inform someone that something is happening, etc., etc., etc. From a monitoring perspective, you get all the analysis from a logging capability that will then be able to be fed, even in real time, to any other systems for a risk assessment analysis, and for those other systems to, based on the risk and the calculations on that risk, to deploy any other mitigation actions, or even let it go, just flag it, quarantine it, stop that user, ask for a different escalating authentication mechanism, etc., etc., etc. And from a user perspective, the user can also be asked to, type here something if I think that you're really not the person, or if TypeWatch thinks that you're really not the person that should be dealing with this technology, or even, be sent a photograph or a screenshot for the admin, etc., just to understand what was it that that user was dealing with or interacting with in terms of the screen, in terms of the text, in terms of the application, etc., etc., etc. When you're talking about the for individuals version, you're talking about something that does not require any server-side component. You're talking about something that is an agent that sits on the system tray, that sits on the endpoint, that is controlling the behavioral patterns of typing of the user, but it's really a plug-and-play installation that does not require any server-side. And because it does not require that server-side installation, it's not dealt or meant to be dealing with an enterprise environment. It's really meant to be dealing with a user that wants to protect his or her laptop or desktop or workstation, and do it in a way that it has an escalating layer of security on top of that logging details or any other token that they may be using. So contrary to the enterprise, which does require that server-side component talking and feeding those client-side agents, and they can talk to each other and implement those policies. When you're talking about the for individuals version, basically you're saying that this is a standalone product or standalone installer that sits on your laptop or desktop and allows you to have the very same keystroke dynamics applied into your own laptop and desktop. And then you have all the statistics available to you just by clicking on that icon on system tray. Basically, you have those statistics in terms of the validation report, the user profile health, how healthy is your profile, what are the alarms, etc. What is the false rejection rate, false, etc., etc., etc. So you can really understand what happened in your computer, in your laptop while you're using it, or even if you sense that someone was trying to assess it, that was not you. You can have a deep understanding from a time perspective of what was going on. And the idea is that you don't need any server-side component. Again, the difference is the very same capability, but you don't need that server-side component. You have the web version, and the web version is really the other side of the equation, which is, what if I could do this without even having to have any agent, any software installed on that endpoint, on that workstation? So the previous two, the enterprise and the for individuals, they all demand the agent to be, or the software to be installed on the endpoint. But the web version doesn't. It means that all the code, all the software is embedded on the application or is embedded on the browser that you're assessing. So basically, if you're in an internet cafe in Taiwan, for example, and you want to have, or you want to do your online course, or you want to, assess some sensitive information online, etc., you don't need to install anything. And if that system that you're assessing, if that web browser that you're assessing, or that application that you're using to assess that content has the behavioral biometrics, the keystroke dynamics by TypeWatch embedded, you will have that very same capability applied to you or allowed to you. So the last slide that I have, even before I open the floor for a couple of questions, is just to understand why are these keystroke dynamics and behavioral biometrics capability interesting from a tech perspective. They are precise in the sense that they deliver up to 98% or plus than 98% accuracy, which makes it virtually impossible to mimic any other person's typing pattern. And really, you may not understand, or you may not believe this, but this is something that has been studied by mathematicians and has been studied by people that study the muscular memory of human beings. You have a unique way of typing, which is as unique to you as it is your fingerprint. The way that you type on a physical keyboard on a computer is as unique to you as a computer. The problem is, how can you build the algorithm to weigh in the variables in such a way that you can really identify a person just by the way that that person types in on that computer? And that's where the technology comes in. And that's where you need to have advanced mathematical algorithms in order to understand and to be as precise. It's persistent because it's continuously assessing who you are. It's not just a one type of moment. Authentication is really identification. It's really understanding who you are every time, every single moment throughout the period in which you are logged into that system, from logging in into logging off. And it's really there, ever watching, completely transparent to you without even asking you to do anything or without even asking you to be aware of anything. It's just letting you do your job. And while you're typing and while you're pressing and releasing that key or flying between one key or the other and particular combinations of keystrokes that are unique to you as an individual, it will assess who you are vis-a-vis or against that logging details that you provided to initiate the session. It's really dynamic. It's really dynamic because it doesn't care about tiredness. It doesn't care about switching or sharing computers or keyboards or any other type of differences or variables in this. Because it's dynamic, it will upgrade and it will move around that profile, or upgrade, better said, that profile, so that it really matches who you are at any given moment in time. It's simple because there's no special hardware. The only thing that you need is that keyboard, which is not special at all. Let's face it, you still have it. You already have it. It's just a physical keyboard. No special keyboard, whatnot. It's just a physical keyboard. It's safe because it follows all the procedures and techniques and best practices to secure those hashes and to secure those information that it gathers from the way that you type. I'm not going to go into that, but it has all the best practices embedded to hash those values and then ship those values into the server in a secure and safe way. And it's really auditable in the sense that you can have all those logs in real time if you want them to be feeding other systems for risk analysis so that other systems can benefit from the way that TypeWatch does it. In the couple of moments that we have left, and because I want to be conscious in terms of the time that we have, there's a couple of questions here from people, so I'll try to go through all of those and try to answer those. So the first question is, what if I hurt my fingers and my typing profile changes? Now, that's a good question. That's the initial question everyone asks whenever we talk about keystroke dynamics. What if I go skiing? What if I hurt my fingers? What happens then? Because the profile is dynamic, the very first time it detects that there's a shift in the behavior on the way that you type, it will ask you for an escalating authentication mechanism. It will ask you to type in something, or it will ask you for that password, or it will ask you for something like that. Once you do that, it will update your profile so that it doesn't ask you again. Once you've validated your identity just by re-authenticating again, it will add that other way of typing into the profile, and it will no longer ask you for anything like that because it will analyze that different way of typing based on the fact that you have a hurt finger. It's yours also, and it's not going to ask you anymore or something like that. What about, another question is, what about keystroke dynamics in mobile devices? Well, the difficulty about mobile devices is that the complexity or the ways or the permutations, so to speak, of the different ways you have onto typing on a mobile device are much higher than the permutations that you have in terms of a physical keyboard. So the short answer is TypeWatch does not have way ways in order to assess that keystroke dynamics on our mobile devices. I've seen other technologies out there trying or saying or claiming that they have that, but really what they have is a way on to assess how you swipe that authentication key in the beginning. That's not really what we're trying to fix. We're trying to fix a way so that you can type on those mobile devices, not by using the keyboard, but by using ways that you press and unpress that screen. So that's not even developed yet. We're thinking about it. So yeah, basically the answer is no. How does it work with touchscreen devices? That's basically the same question. Touchscreen devices, it's touch dynamics or mouse dynamics, if you will, but better yet, touch dynamics. We are in the process of developing it. It's not there yet. What if one person uses different brands to commute with the different keyboards, like a Mac, Lenovo, etc.? So basically, the idea is that per that keyboard, you have different profiles. We're working on ways so that you have one profile that incorporates the different keyboards. All the small variances, all the small little changes will weigh into the equation. And so if you're using a different keyboard and that keyboard makes you type in a different way, once you're building that profile, if you use all those different keyboards once you're building that profile, it will have that into consideration. If you don't, the very first time you use a different keyboard, it will ask you for an authentication mechanism, and basically if you are able to authenticate, it will allow you to add, or it will automatically add that different way of typing into your profile. It will not ask you again. It's pretty much the same answer as for the hurt my finger question, but basically there's not a way there yet in order to have multiple keyboards doing multiple profiles. So another question is mouse dynamics. And mouse dynamics has to do with the fact the way that you touch or the way that you use your mouse. Basically here there's multiple ways for behavioral biometrics. What we're talking here is keystroke dynamics, the way that you press and unpress those keys. Mouse dynamics is a completely different type of behavioral biometrics that is also under development by TypeWatch. Another question is, can it recognize if a document was written by a machine? Yes, it can. Basically, it can recognize if the document is written by a machine, in the sense that if you have a script that is inputting keys into the document, it will detect that it's not the rightful owner of that profile, and it will automatically shut you down or ask you for something that will allow you to prove your identity, and the machine will not be able to do that. And this, you can also think about a little bit of what if we're doing brute force attacks, and if we're doing, you know, some bot analysis, some bot attacks into this, and you're having scripts in order to type in those keys, maybe you can think about keystroke dynamics also as a way to prevent that from happening or continue to happen. Another question is, so since there is an ongoing process of learning, what happens the second time the user uses the system, since it has only one sample for the first use? It's not really one sample. One profile has 30 different samples. It comprises of 30 different ways that you type. This means that it has, you know, let me put this into perspective. It has the way that you type in the morning, the way that you type in the afternoon, the way that you type after a customer meeting, the way that you type after you go to the gym. You know, I'm just joking a little bit, but it has 30 different ways, unique ways on how you type, and that is the 30 different ways that it assesses on how you type. If you have a 31st way, so if there's a 31st sample, basically after you break your finger or something like that, it will ask you for that authentication. If you're able to re-authenticate yourself, it will feed that extra different sample into the profile. It will discard for this discard the last one of the last samples, and it will no longer ask you for that authentication. You know, we've extended the time that we had allocated for this. I thank you for your time. Please be free to send us, you know, questions or doubts or anything that you have. You're more than willing to download TypeWatch for Individuals free to use from our website. Just go to the TypeWatch for Individuals page, and you'll be able to download it for free, and you get 30 days free in order to use it. Thank you again for attending. I hope to see you next time.